Okay, so we've talked about how much money we've been saving, we've invested, what we're spending our money on, all of that stuff on the channel for a few years now, but it's definitely been a minute since we've given you an update on how our money is going together. So here we are with that update today.
Okay, so I feel like there's been a lot of changes and a lot of things that have happened over the last, I don't know, several months, year or so since we actually caught up with everyone. But I feel like it's been twofold, right? So there's been us spending more, which I feel like some of you are gonna be a lot more happy about that because that was a constant complaint from some people where they thought that we just weren't spending that much money. And then there's also the increasing our income part. So
good point.
Yeah, which one do you want to tackle first?
Well, I was gonna say too, I feel like whenever we do these videos, you guys probably have seen mine at the beginning of every year for the last 4 years now.
Yeah.
But I talk a lot about how I'm gonna be saving and maximizing the percentage that I save that year, right? And you guys have seen it change as we become self-employed. But this year was interesting because at the beginning of the year, we still had our regular plans for trying to save as much as possible, and we always are still doing that.
Yeah.
But like Dennis just said, we finally are spending a little bit more money, easing into, I don't know, just doing a little bit more too. But I think we should start with increasing the income really quick.
Yeah, so basically me and Steph sat down after completing 1 full year of us being self-employed.
Like a full calendar year. It's technically been over a year and a half, but we had our first January to December.
Yeah, and we looked at the finances, we looked at the numbers, and we said, I think for Steph, actually one of the biggest points that she wanted to make sure that she was doing was actually investing consistently $1,000 a month. So we decided to increase our incomes by $1,000, and that was going to go to either investing or should there be anything else that we needed to spend money on, we'd have that room as opposed to having a really, really tight budget, you know?
Yeah, as a quick recap for everyone or for anyone who's new, we've been paying ourselves out since we went full time only just over $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And that's pretty tight, right? That's going to be pretty much just for our main expenses, with rent already being half of that, let alone everything else.
Yeah.
So to add on that additional $1,000 a month, it gives us room to invest consistently. We obviously are still saving more money than that in our business bank account, but we're talking about the personal side of things. And so having a little bit more to make sure we're consistently investing now when we're younger, and now that we know that we had that bandwidth to do it, we're being a little more cautious with how much we paid ourselves out last year. This year we feel a little bit more sure about how things are going, so that's how we landed on that number. Now at the same time, we also did happen to end up spending a little bit more money this year. Last year was a lot of heads down, getting used to this new workflow. You notice the change in our video style even too over time. We tried a lot of different things out as we were getting used to this. But this year we've been doing a lot more stuff. It really started with us wanting to get out of the house more with basketball.
Oh, yeah. So basketball is one of those things where actually initially I was super against. So
by the way, when we say basketball, it's intramural sports.
Yeah, basically an adult recreation league that we had done in the past. So at first I was super against it, just simply from a spending money perspective, which is ridiculous when you actually think about it because it's your health, right? But Steph convinced me.
Convinced them we needed some out of the house time.
Yeah, so we had our first season, which was really, really good last fall to winter.
Yep.
And then it turned into this thing where we wanted to do it consistently. And now we're at the point where we're signing up for each session.
So that's been a big thing this year. We also ended up having a lot more travel come up. So at the beginning of the year, we were playing around with the idea of doing, I don't even know if I mentioned it in the beginning of the year video or not. We're thinking about doing our first trip in a while. Since then, we've already been on a few work-related trips that have come up. So we got to go to Ottawa in March, which was pretty cool. We just came back from Kenya last month, which was a big one. We went with YouTube
that
specifically.
That was really cool.
Yeah, hope you guys saw some of that on some other platforms in the community tab too.
We posted a short on it, by the way.
Yes.
There you go.
Go check that out. And me and my family actually ended up going to Seattle and San Francisco as well. So a lot of those trips were either work-related or for me, a family trip too.
Yeah.
So the expenses weren't super insane comparatively. I had some little expenses that came with it, which is definitely added to the budget. I'll talk about that in a second. But we're also going to talk about the trip that we're taking later that was fully paid for by us. Biggest expense we've ever had together.
Very big expense.
Yeah, definitely a big one for us. So a lot of that this year has been, okay, we feel a little more comfortable spending some money on different things, but you know us, we're still big planners and budgeters, so it's been a lot of planning it out, deciding on things, and a lot of working together as a couple too, because we have two sides. We work together, we also are just a couple together. So when it comes to deciding what we're comfortable spending money on and how we're gonna divide that up, that's a little bit more about what we wanna talk about in this video when we update you on how things have been going for us.
Yeah, and one of the biggest expenses that I'm gonna talk about is also our cell phones, so
yeah. Get ready for that.
Okay, so before we talk about some of the things that we're spending on money now, especially some of those areas where we were talking about traveling, basketball, basically all these really fun areas, first, let's talk about what we did before we decided that we were actually gonna spend money. So me and Steph, being budgeting people who love to look at their money, we were looking at our budgets and we basically identified some key areas where we were both looking at ourselves thinking, why are we spending that much money on that specific thing? Now, one of the really, really big areas was our cell phone plan. So specifically Steph's cell phone plan. If you've been tuned in for the last like year and a half, Steph has been doing these like update videos where she basically comes on and one of the main things that she keeps repeating is that she's gonna change her cell phone plan. Now, the reason that she's been wanting to change her cell phone plan is because she's been spending like over $100 a month for honestly not that great of a plan. Like if you actually look at the plan, it's not worth $100. I mean, I don't think there's a plan out there that's worth $100, but because we're in Canada and our cell phone providers basically have a monopoly on the market, they basically don't offer us like good plans at all. So me and Steph basically looked at each other and said, okay, it's time. We have to make the change. Before we start doing all these other things, this is an area where we're unnecessarily spending a high amount of money. And it's also one of those areas that we wanted to transfer over to the business. So for those of you guys that don't know, your cell phone, right, if it's being used for business use, that's something that you can actually add as an expense for the business as opposed to paying for it personally. So that's something that we wanted to do. The only thing is you need to find a corporate mobile plan. So basically what I did is I looked online, I looked at a whole bunch of plans and I couldn't find any good ones really. But what I did find is that Costco, out of all places, had a small business corporate like program that they have. So you could go in, as long as you prove that you have a small business, you could open up a small business account and you can add some plans to it. Basically, the process was super simple. So when me and Steph decided that we were actually gonna do it, we made this into like a whole big day. And by the way, me and Steph didn't have Costco membership, so that was kind of like the first thing we need to do. So to give you guys basically like a lay of the land of like how it works, me and Steph both are under the same account, but in order to like get us some sort of cheaper plan, they had to still give us different plans that still all roll up to one. So basically my plan is a $70 plan, and then Steph has a $45 plan for a total of $115. Now the plans themselves, I personally didn't want to be paying over $100 for 2 cell phones, but like we didn't really have that many options. That was kind of like the best plan they had. So we're currently paying $115 when Steph's old plan was just over $100 for the one line.
So I'm sure a lot of you guys are very happy to hear that I finally brought that phone bill cost down. And technically, because I moved it to the business, it's not even on my personal budget anymore. I got to move that category to a 0. So I'm really happy that that's not over my head anymore. And then I can officially say I'm not paying way too much for my phone every single month. Now, there's a few things that I want to talk about next about where our money is going, especially now that it's not going to the phone bill every month, and a few different changes that we've had this year. So one is that our rent actually increased for the first time since we moved into this place 5 years ago, almost to the day. I think we're like midway through July right now. So July, 5 years ago, we moved into this spot, and luckily it had the same rent every single time. This year it went up, but only by $25 each. So instead of $1,850, we're now paying $1,900 total. Sometimes when I say I only pay $925, now $950, people thought that was the full amount, but it's double that. Now it's at $1,900. Still a really good deal, so we're not mad about it. But that's a little increase. All the more reason that it's important to bring down the fixed costs that you can, like your phone bill, like internet, stuff like that, because you can't help it if your rent's slowly going up over time if you want to keep the same place. So that's one area that it's gone up. Otherwise, like we said at the beginning, we did increase our salaries this year by $1,000, which has been really great because it gives us more room in the budget to invest. But like we were saying before, we've also been spending a little bit more money this year as well. So I'll kind of talk about where the money's gone between those two different spaces, investing and spending more. I also wanted to talk about what my biggest expenses have been for this year. So far this year, I've spent about $650 on basketball total. His will be a little bit less because I needed new basketball shoes. I think I should count that in the category because if we weren't playing, I wouldn't have bought those. I think I spent $130 on them, which was one of the best deals we could find actually. I remember I was researching shoes first and was like, I can only find ones for $200, but Dennis was good about bringing me down, finding me some pairs that were a little bit cheaper. So I think it was $129 specifically on that. Otherwise, $650 total for basketball, a little bit less for him without the shoes, which was good. So that's a big expense for the year. Another one has been travel, like we've talked about. In a second, we're both gonna talk about what we have coming up next. But so far for the year, it's been like little travel expenses, but it still adds up. So for me, from what I kind of put together, it's about $450 I've spent on travel stuff. The reason it's so high, even though we've had most of the trips we've done paid for work. It's because I spent $200-ish on a travel backpack, which is a good expense I'm very happy with. Oh, actually, it was a backpack plus the toiletry bag. I'm happy with those purchases, which is good, but that already eats into a lot of it. And the other $200-ish is on food at the airports, different prepping for the trip, air tags, things like that. Dennis's would be similar, but again, minus the $200 bag. I feel like all of our expenses are similar, but I add on something extra on top of it. So those are 2 big expenses for the year. And the last one is actually that I'm a bridesmaid for the first time. So my best friend since we were young is getting married in about a month. We just had our bachelorette weekend this past weekend. If I haven't noticed, I'm a little bit sick. I think it's from being up late and going out and having the bachelorette activities. But this is another thing I really want to talk about in depth in the future, all of the different expenses that go into it. But so far, I think I've spent, similar to the basketball expenses, about $650 so far. We're still a month from the wedding, but that was on things like buying the bridesmaid's dress was a big one. I got like try-on dresses first and then the actual one. Different gifts. We've had a few bridal showers, bachelorette weekend, buying food, just contributing to all the different events going on. But I still have to pay for hair and makeup that I'm getting done with the group. It's part of what, I don't know what we decided on doing for this wedding specifically. So I think that's like $250. There's the hotel room. That's a few $100s for 2 nights. There's also tailoring the dress. So a lot of expenses still to come. I want to do a full in-depth going into all of that. But if you guys have any tips on wedding expenses yourself, you let me know and then we'll talk about it more in the future. So with increasing our salary, the original goal was to invest that full extra $1,000 per month. I've done that a few of the months so far this year, but I've also spent some of that money on these different expenses that are much bigger buckets than typically budgeted for the month. I think that's a question I get because my budget is so tight and Dennis's is the same. He just tends to stick a little more closely to it than me. But where does that extra money come from? Sometimes it's just the buffer money I have in my checking account. Otherwise, it's now been that increased money that we give ourselves per month. Some of it goes towards these expenses. So I think so far this year, in 6 months, I've invested about $9,000 total. I want to do another $10,000 for the rest of the year. And then whatever we have at the end of the year for our bonuses, we'll go to that as well. So we'll talk more about that in another video this year. But that's kind of where that extra money's been going from and by extra, again, I just mean increased salary, a little bit to investing, actually a decent amount to investing, but also to some of these big travel and wedding and basketball expenses for the year. Okay, so we're here together again to talk about the last big change to our budget and what we're spending our money on this year because it really is a big change for us. You guys might have known if you've seen our videos at all, literally since we started our channel in like 2019, we haven't spent pretty much any money on travel. We obviously just talked about how this year we had a few different work trips. I did have one family trip come up, but otherwise, especially together, we really haven't done anything. And especially since we started doing this full time, we just were so focused on our work. We get comments all the time from people telling us to like go out and do stuff, and we were planning on it eventually, and now the time has come. So later this year, a few months from now, we do have a trip coming up and we're actually going to Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, super, super exciting. Like for us, landing on this trip was huge because for me, first and foremost, especially when we're talking about traveling, weather is like of the utmost importance. Like
hates winter.
Like if Steph has suggested going anywhere cold, that was 100% out. Like I'm not doing half the year in winter here in Canada and then doing another and doing a vacation where we're going to be cold. So anyways, weather was huge. It was cool that we chose a place that was also a mixture of like the relaxing vibe because we're going to be hitting up like a bunch of beaches while we're there, but also like
to see.
A place where there's a whole bunch to see. We have a lot of like day-to-day activities that we have planned too, which is really cool. Yeah, we're hopefully gonna hit up some like wineries or wine places. That'll be really exciting and cool. So
and also it was a big change to us getting to the decision of actually going somewhere as well, because again, we've been working on growing our business, right, and working for ourselves. And I think having a year under our belts, feeling comfortable with where we're at, is when Dennis finally had the moment specifically where he's like, okay, I feel like we can go ahead and do this. Yeah. And then the planning process is where we were still trying to find that mix, like settling on a budget. Basically, we had a rough idea in mind, and then we did our research to see what was realistic and what we wanted to expand on, how long we wanted to go for, all the different things that add to the cost. And then kind of adjusted from there. So obviously it's naturally still an expensive trip because we're going international. We're going for over 2 weeks.
I mean, the flights alone, right? Like the flights alone are just expensive in general, right?
Yeah.
So.
And again, we say expensive, like people I feel like have different thoughts on what expensive is when it comes to travel. For us, anything over like a small trip's gonna be expensive because we haven't done it together yet, and we try to keep it as cost effective as possible. But there's a few things we've done already to try and make it reasonably lower cost than it could be. Luckily, because we work for ourselves, we could be flexible with the dates that we fly out and fly back in, the order that we did, the different stops in the trip. So we're flying into Barcelona, kind of moving around Spain, ending up in Portugal. So the way that we hit up our flow was making it the most cost effective as possible, staying in Airbnbs when it made sense, all that different stuff. So if you guys have any ways to keep travel lower cost, you let us know. We're gonna do another video for sure where we break down exactly how much we spend. So if it feels like we're not giving you the numbers right now, it's because we're gonna be super specific, give you all the numbers.
Yeah.
Ways that we saved money, ways that we didn't, but probably could have once we learn after the fact too.
Yeah, that kind of wraps it up in terms of the trip itself.
But we definitely want you guys to let us know if there's anything you want to see. Again, keep in mind we're going to talk about all the numbers, but anything else you want to see around this, we'll be sharing on here. We're also going to be sharing on Instagram, especially when we're actually traveling. So make sure you check that out. And that's pretty much it for how our money has changed from the beginning of the year. Obviously, there's been updates with increasing our salaries, with investing more money, also spending more money on these different areas. So let us know what you think. Let us know also the biggest expense category you've had this year. I think that'd be really fun to know.
Yeah, let's tap it in the comments, and yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Let's get it.
See you then. Bye.